Welcome to the History Maps podcast. Today we are continuing our Southeast Asian history series, and we are wading directly into the ethnohistory of a group whose physical and cultural footprint has completely shaped northern Thailand. We have a rather thick stack of sources to sift through for you today. Archaeological surveys, paleogenomic data, linguistic taxonomies.
Right, and recent ethnographic record as well.
Yeah.
It is a highly complex lineage we're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. Our mission is to figure out exactly who the Lawa people are, how they engineered ancient walled cities, and, well, why they are currently at the center of a very tense environmental and legal conflict.
It is a continuous presence, really, stretching from the Neolithic agricultural expansions all the way to modern courtrooms.
But right off the bat, before we even look at the ancient history, we need to clear up a severe case of mistaken identity in the historical records.
Of the Lawa confusion, yeah.
Right, you constantly see the Lawa conflated with another group called the Lua. It shows up in administrative documents a lot.
Making that distinction early is critical for you to understand the rest of this history. The confusion stems largely from lowland populations and state administrators who use the term Lua as a generic catch-all label for pretty much any upland Austroasiatic-speaking population.
Just for administrative convenience, essentially.
Exactly. But linguistically, historically, genetically, the Lawa and the Lua are entirely distinct entities.
Let's unpack the linguistic taxonomy just to see exactly where that division lies. Where do the Lawa actually fit in the linguistic tree?
So the Lawa speak a language situated within the Wyak sub-branch of the Plongic branch.
Okay.
And that branch is part of the broader Austroasiatic language family. This specific heritage means the Lawa have a direct evolutionary relationship with the Blang and Wa peoples of southern China and Myanmar.
And they are deeply indigenous to the provinces of Chiang Mai and Mae Hong Son in northern Thailand, right?
Yes, they have been there for millennia.
Okay, so if the Lawa are Palanchic speakers indigenous to Chiang Mai, who exactly are the Lua?
The Lua, specifically the Lua of Nan province and neighboring areas in Laos, they speak Khmuic languages.
Which is a completely different branch.
A completely different branch of the Austroasiatic family, yes.
Yeah.
And beyond the linguistic difference, they have a completely different transnational trajectory. The Lua are a late migrating refugee population.
How late are we talking here?
We're talking about the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They migrated from Laos into Nan province to escape warfare, to find arable land.
Right.
And then decades later, following the Pathet Lao victory in the Laotian Civil War, another wave of Lua refugees crossed the border into Thailand.
Ending up at the Ban Vinai refugee camp, I believe the sources mentioned.
Correct. And many of those families eventually resettled in the United States, putting down roots in places like California and Minnesota.
So, calling both groups Lua is like calling both the French and the Romanians Latins.
That is an accurate way to frame it, yeah.
Yeah. You are looking at two groups who share a distant linguistic root from thousands of years ago, and assuming they share the exact same modern history, the same migrations, the same culture.
Which they absolutely do not.
Yeah.
The French and Romanians took completely different paths, just as the Lawa and the Lua did.
Adding to the confusion, I noticed the Eastern Law of Chiang Mai sometimes prefer to use the term Lua when talking to outsiders.
Purely because it is the term the Thai majority recognizes. But academic researchers, and the sources we are relying on today, strictly maintain the term Lawa to preserve that historical clarity.
So today we're focusing exclusively on the Lawa, the indigenous Palangic-speaking population of the northern Thai highlands.
Exactly.
Let's dig into that indigenous baseline, because the sources provide some pretty extensive paleogenomic data. Where does the genetic story of the Lawa actually begin?
The genome-wide analyses of Austroasiatic-speaking populations across the region point back to the Neolithic agricultural expansion.
Right, a demographic movement from the Yangtze River Basin.
Yes, approximately 4,000 years ago.
So we are tracking early farmers migrating southward into what we now consider mainland Southeast Asia.
They moved south, bringing wet rice cultivation techniques with them. And as they migrated, they encountered and intermarried with the indigenous hunter-gatherer populations of the Hoabinhian culture, who were already established in the region.
Right.
Throughout the Neolithic period and the early Bronze Age, these Austroasiatic-speaking groups basically became the dominant populations across the mainland.
I was looking at the specific Y chromosome data mentioned in the sources. The geneticists highlight two primary paternal lineages for the modern Lawa, OM95 and OM324.
That's right.
But they point out a very specific pattern, high frequency but low internal diversity. What does low internal diversity actually look like in practice over 4,000 years?
Well, it paints a very clear picture of social structure. When you see high frequency but low internal diversity in paternal lineages, it points directly to a long history of localized endogamy.
Meaning they were marrying strictly within their own specific communities.
Precisely. They were not traveling long distances to find partners or mixing with incoming migrating groups. It also indicates strong genetic isolation and patriarchal postmarital residence patterns.
Where the married couple moves in with or near the husband's family.
Yes, the women might move between nearby villages, but the male genetic line stays rooted in one specific geographical location.
And over centuries, that creates a highly distinct, concentrated genetic signature in those highland enclaves.
Exactly. What is fascinating here is if we contrast that with the Tai-Kadai majority living in the lowlands today, the difference is stark.
How so?
The genomes of the modern Tai-Kadai group show clear evidence of demic diffusion and heavy genetic admixture. Their profile reflects much later extensive migrations from southern China and widespread intermingling as they moved into the valleys.
But the Lawa genomes are essentially a time capsule.
They are. They represent the indigenous baseline, offering a window into the pre-Tai history of the region.
And that concept of a pre-Tai history is the perfect entry point to look at their physical footprint. Because before they consolidated into those highland enclaves, the Lawa dominated the lowland valleys.
They absolutely did. The sources make it clear that they were not just decentralized groups living in the forest. Between the years 500 and 1200, they were highly organized urban planners.
Right. The archaeological record from the Chiang Mai Lamphun Basin outlines this. They engineered fortified urban centers that required significant centralized labor and logistical planning.
The sources name 3 specific walled cities: Wang Napburi, Wang Swandak, and Wang Chetlin. And Wang simply means a walled or fortified city.
The details on Wang Chetlin really stood out to me. It was not just a basic settlement, it was a circular walled city built right at the base of Doi Suthep Mountain.
Building a circular enclosure at the base of a mountain slope is a very intentional engineering choice. These settlements featured earthen ramparts and deep moats. Positioning Wang Chetlin at the base of Doi Suthep allowed them to manage and control the water runoff from the mountain.
So they were guarding the valley, but they were also strategically positioning themselves to control the water supply.
Yes, the most vital agricultural resource.
And the origins of these cities are deeply intertwined with the region's mythology. Let's look at the narrative surrounding the monk Vasithep.
A very notable legend in the region.
The legend states that Vasithep was the son of 2 Lawa chieftains. He chose to retreat from secular leadership and became a hermit, living in a cave on the slopes of Doi Suthep.
Right.
Then, in the 7th century, he descends from the mountain and plays a central role in founding the city of Haraphunchai.
And the legends preserved in the Kamadevivasa Pali Chronicle, compiled in the 15th century, give us a stylized but informative look at the political dynamics of that era.
Because according to the text, Vansethep did not rule Haraphunchai himself, right?
Correct. Instead, he invited Princess Kamadevi, who hailed from the Mon Kingdom of Lavo to the south, to become the ruler of this new city.
He essentially imports a foreign ruler, and that decision sparks a major conflict. The Chronicle says King Valanga, a powerful Lawa sovereign, lays siege to Haraphunchai shortly after she arrives.
And the text claims Valanga commanded an army of 80,000 soldiers.
Which, I mean, an army of 80,000 over an unrequited marriage proposal, which is the inciting incident the text provides, feels like the Chronicle taking some narrative liberties.
You are right to view the numbers with skepticism. Ancient chronicles routinely inflate troop counts to amplify the drama.
Even just organizing the logistics to feed 80,000 soldiers in the 7th century would be an undertaking.
Absolutely. But the underlying historical event, the conflict itself, is what matters. The narrative represents the severe cultural friction between the incoming Manvaravati culture of Haraphunchai and the indigenous Lawa populations who already controlled the basin.
So how does this Mon-Lawa war actually conclude in the sources?
It ends in a diplomatic alliance forged through integration. After a series of prolonged battles and Valanga's eventual defeat, Queen Kamadevi's twin sons are married to the daughters of the Lawa king.
A diplomatic marriage symbolizing the eventual coexistence and cultural blending of the Mon and the Lawa.
Precisely.
While we are talking about their territory, I want to address a hypothesis mentioned in the regional histories, which suggests the Lawa ruled all the way south to the Central Plains, specifically to the city of Lopburi.
Ah, the Lawa hypothesis.
Right. The argument seems to rest entirely on the phonetic similarity between the word Lawa and the historical name of the city, Lavapura. Does the archaeological evidence actually support a Lawa empire stretching that far south?
The short answer is no. Modern archaeology firmly rejects the Lawa hypothesis.
So it is just a coincidence.
The phonetic overlap is purely coincidental. When archaeologists excavate south of the Middle Ping River Valley, they find no material evidence, no pottery, no burial sites, no architectural styles that point to a Lawa presence.
Okay, so the epigraphic evidence from Lopburi points to it being dominated by Mon-speaking populations of the Dvarmati culture.
Yes. The ancestral Lawa were geographically concentrated in the northern highlands and the upper tributaries of the Ping River.
Strictly a northern power, but that power dynamic undergoes a fundamental shift in the late 13th century.
This is when the Taiyuan people begin their southward expansion, completely altering the geopolitical landscape.
This brings us to the arrival of King Mangrai in the late 1200s. He was the 25th monarch of the Lava Chakaraj dynasty.
When Mangrai moves his forces into the region, he observes that the Mon rulers of Haraphranchai and the indigenous Lawa are engaged in open conflict.
The old alliances had deteriorated completely, and several Lawa settlements near Doi Suthep had already been destroyed.
Mangrai sees this rift and exploits it brilliantly. He approaches the displaced Lawa and forms a strategic military alliance with them.
Combining his Thai forces with the indigenous Lawa fighters to overthrow the Haraphranchai kingdom in 1292.
That victory was the catalyst for unifications. It allowed Mangrai to consolidate the region under the newly established Lana kingdom.
Which translates to the land of a million rice fields, right?
Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm.
But Mangrai faced a very specific political problem. He had conquered the territory, but he was an incoming Thai king attempting to rule over an indigenous Lawa population that knew the land better than he did.
To secure true legitimacy, he implemented a syncretic strategy. He incorporated the Lawa directly into the royal coronation ritual.
It was a masterclass in statecraft. Mangrai understood that military victory was not enough. He needed spiritual and terrestrial legitimacy.
So he integrated Lawa succession rituals into the formal Lana state ceremonies.
During the coronation, the incoming Thai king had to undergo a process where Lawa elders formally recognized his authority.
The sources mention that the Lawa were formally acknowledged in these rituals as the owners of the soil.
Yes, the ritual was a symbolic delegation of power. The Lawa, representing the original inhabitants, were publicly transferring their terrestrial rights and spiritual authority over the landscape to the new Thai dynasty.
It was a formal acknowledgement that the Thai kings ruled by the consent of the land's original stewards.
And Mangrai cemented this relationship physically as well. In 1296, when he founded his new capital, the modern city of Chiang Mai, he built it directly over the ruins of Wayang Nopburi.
The ancient Lawa walled city.
Yes, he even embedded the old Lawa name into the full ceremonial title of the new capital.
That decision marks the true beginning of Lana civilization as a hybrid entity, blending the animist beliefs and agricultural knowledge of the Lawa with the Theravada Buddhist practices of the Mon and the administrative frameworks of the Thai.
However, we have to note that not all Lawa participated in this integration. While many in the lowlands were absorbed into Thai society through intermarriage, others chose a different path. To avoid taxation, conscription, and the loss of their autonomy, many Lawa communities retreated higher into the mountains.
And that retreat up the slopes completely changes their way of life. They go from being lowland urban planners to establishing isolated highland enclaves.
But they did not just survive in the mountains. They engineered a highly specialized socioeconomic model that insulated them from lowland control.
They became masters of earth and iron.
Their approach to the highland landscape was unique compared to later migrating groups, who relied heavily on pioneer swidden farming.
Which involves clearing a patch of primary forest, cultivating it until the soil is exhausted, and then abandoning it.
Right. The Lawa did not do that. They established permanent, deeply rooted settlements.
They achieved this through a dual agricultural model, adapting to both upland and lowland conditions within their mountain territories. How exactly did they balance that?
Well, in the shallow valleys and on the relatively flat plateaus of their territory, they constructed permanent, gravity-fed wet rice terraces.
Which requires intricate engineering.
Building retaining walls and complex irrigation networks to divert mountain streams into the paddies. At the same time, on the steeper mountain slopes, they practiced rotational shifting cultivation to grow upland rice, maize, and vegetables.
They also maintained substantial animal husbandry, raising water buffalo, pigs, and chickens.
The buffalo provided labor for the plowing, the pigs and chickens provided regular protein, and crucially, these animals were necessary for their spiritual sacrifices.
It was a resilient system. If the upland crops failed due to lack of rain, the irrigated terraces provided a safety net.
Exactly. But what truly distinguished them economically, what made them indispensable to the regional trade network, was their metallurgy.
The epicenter of this industrial prowess was the subdistrict of Bo Luang in Chiang Mai province. The sources indicate that the Eastern Law actually established this specific settlement in the early 19th century after severe cholera outbreaks forced them to migrate.
And when they relocated, they found a site with natural water springs and rich iron ore deposits.
The metallurgical process they set up there was highly organized.
It was an industrial effort that required specialized knowledge and intense physical labor.
Let's walk through exactly how they produced the steel, because the sources are quite detailed here. It starts with Lawa miners extracting hematite and limonite ore straight from open quarries.
They transport this raw ore back to the village, where they have built specialized bloomery furnaces out of locally sourced clay and stone.
They load the furnace, creating a core of charcoal layered with the raw iron ore.
And the critical challenge is achieving the necessary temperature. To do this, the Lawa use hand-operated bellows.
Workers would continuously pump air through hollow bamboo tubes known as tuyers, forcing oxygen directly into the combustion chamber.
Through sheer manual labor, they raise the internal temperature of that furnace to approximately 1,200 degrees Celsius.
1,200 degrees, driven entirely by hand-pumped bamboo bellows.
Yes. At 1,200 degrees, the iron does not melt into a pourable liquid like in a modern blast furnace. It forms a spongy, glowing, solid mass, which metallurgists call a bloom.
But this bloom is embedded with silicate slag, essentially melted rock and impurities.
So the workers pull this scorching hot sponge of iron and slag out of the furnace, and they begin hammering it relentlessly.
Like squeezing water out of a sponge, but in this case the sponge is solid metal and the water is liquid silicate slag.
The rhythmic hammering physically expels the impurities, allowing them to forge high-quality steel.
And it is vital to understand that the furnaces at Bo Luang were part of a much older Austroasiatic upland industrial tradition.
We have archaeological evidence to prove this. The sources point to the Satham furnaces discovered in Luang Namtha province in Laos,
where archaeologists uncovered an early medieval iron smelting workshop that contains 7 subcircular furnaces.
and thermoluminescence dating placed their active use between the years 621 and 1181.
Proving that upland Austroasiatic-speaking populations were successfully operating multi-furnace industrial complexes centuries before any European contact.
They were producing raw iron in quantities that far exceeded their own local demand.
The Law of Bo Luang used this purified steel to forge highly durable plowshares, axes, and knives, and traded them along the montane routes to lowland markets.
This gave the Lawa immense economic leverage.
But that economic independence eventually hit an industrial wall. The primary smelting industry at Bo Luang collapsed in the 1940s, right?
The expansion of regional trade brought an influx of cheap, industrially manufactured steel from lowland factories. The traditional bloomery process simply could not compete.
But the Lawa demonstrated adaptability. The sources highlight the western Lawa village of Bon La Up in Mae Hong Son province.
When the iron trade bottomed out, the artisans there transitioned their skills into silversmithing.
Today, Bon La Up is recognized as a major center for intricate, hand-carved silver jewelry.
They preserved the ancestral muscle memory of the forge, just applied it to a different medium.
And alongside their metalwork, the Lawa maintained their cultural identity through their textiles. Lawa women are recognized as exceptional weavers, using traditional backstrap looms.
The dress codes were highly symbolic. Unmarried Lawa women traditionally wore vibrant yellow and orange bead necklaces tightly wound around their necks and chests, indicating purity.
And once a woman married, her attire transitioned to longer garments featuring dark, intricate patterns.
Every aspect of their material culture was intimately tied to their spiritual life. They did not view their physical environment as separate from their cosmology.
So they have this physical mastery of the earth, but for the Lawa, you could not physically manipulate the mountain without spiritually answering to it.
The landscape was a living, breathing entity.
Let's explore that cosmology, the megalithic stones they raised, and the religious syncretism that defines their modern beliefs.
The foundation of the Lawa worldview rests on animism and ancestor worship. They perceive the natural universe as being inhabited by a vast multitude of powerful spirits, which they refer to as Phi.
Residing in the deep forests, the flowing rivers, the soil, and the high mountain peaks.
We talked about Doi Suthep earlier. Peaks like Doi Kam and Doi Suthep are the dwelling places of ancestral guardian spirits known as the Phi Kun name.
And these specific spirits are believed to actively control the water supply for the entire valley.
So respecting the mountain is synonymous with ensuring the valley receives the water it needs to survive.
Alongside the nature spirits, ancestor spirits known as Tai Yuan are central to daily life.
Every household maintains domestic altars to ensure the protection of their family lineage. But when we look at the physical manifestation of their spiritual system, nothing is more striking than their megalithic tradition.
The sources provide detailed descriptions of these stone memorials, known as Nam posts, found near Bo Luang and Meito. What exactly was the purpose of erecting these stones?
The name posts are the physical culmination of a ritual known as the Feast of Merit.
Okay.
In traditional Lawa society, particularly for the male aristocracy known as the Samang, prestige was about public sacrifice. To be honored with a Nam monument after death, a Samang must have had a water buffalo sacrificed in his honor during his death ceremonies.
If the family lacked the wealth to afford a buffalo, no stone was erected.
Correct.
It functions as a permanent ledger of social and spiritual credit. You sacrifice your most valuable economic asset, a working water buffalo, and your status is literally etched into the landscape.
The sacrifice ensures a prosperous life for the deceased in the next world and transfers spiritual merit to the living community left behind.
During these funerals, the Lawa also utilized thread squares, right?
Yes. At the grave of a male Samang, they would hang a bundle of 25 intricately woven thread squares. The belief was that these geometric crosses would serve as a spiritual ladder, helping the soul climb to heaven.
Over time, the physical nature of these memorials evolved. We still have older stone men here standing, some dating back 120 to 130 years, like those erected for Kunsa and Kunbokwa.
But eventually the practice shifted. Today, instead of hauling stone, they carve large wooden posts called sagang.
The transition to wood is practical, it is more readily available, and requires less labor.
But the ritual significance remains intact. You see this vividly during their central communal event, the Taniga Festival.
Also referred to as the Ghost Party ceremony, which takes place annually in December or January. It is an intensive ritual dedicated to spiritually cleansing the village.
During the festival, the village shamans erect immense double sagang posts in the village square. These stand 3 to 4 meters high and are covered in specific carvings.
They frequently feature the enemy's teeth motif, which are sharp zigzags carved along the edges, and depictions of lizards viewed from the back.
These motifs are direct descendants of the ancient megalithic art styles found on the older stones.
And during the climax of the festival, water buffaloes are tethered to these sagang posts and ritually sacrificed to the supreme village spirit, Pisapite.
The community believes this sacrifice is necessary to ensure a bountiful harvest and protect the village from disease.
When we look at these practices today, we see a profound example of religious syncretism. This animistic foundation has steadily absorbed centuries of outside theological influence.
They have integrated Theravada Buddhist concepts of merit-making directly into their local temples. Buddhist monks and animist shamans operate side by side.
And in the mid-20th century, another religious paradigm arrived: Protestant missionaries. The sources document the work of Don and Janet Schlatter of the New Tribes Mission.
The Schlatters moved into the village of Bon Kong Loi, and their impact was largely linguistic.
They took the purely spoken Lawa language and developed a written orthography for it, utilizing the Thai script.
This allowed them to translate the Bible into the Lawa language, which facilitated widespread conversions.
Today, you will find large Christian Lawa communities, especially around the district of Mae Lanoi, but they have not erased their cultural identity. The sources note that every year, thousands gather for an enormous Christmas festival in Mae Hong Son.
It is a display of modern religious pluralism superimposed over an ancient cultural identity.
From spiritual guardianship of the forest, we have to turn our attention to a much more terrestrial conflict. Because right now, the traditional ways the Lawa manage their landscape are clashing directly with the modern Thai state.
The core of this conflict revolves around a farming practice known as traditional regenerative agriculture, or TRA.
which is the formal term for the rotational shifting cultivation we discussed earlier. And it is entirely different from the destructive slash and burn practices that are often criticized.
Let's break down the mechanics of TRA, because the science behind it is what makes it so central to this debate. The Lawa do not clear a forest permanently.
They operate on a systematic cycle. They select a plot, clear it, cultivate crops for a single season, and then leave that exact plot fallow for a period ranging from 7 to 12 years.
And the method they use to clear the plot is the key. When they cut down trees, they do not uproot them. They intentionally cut the tree, leaving a stump at a precise height of 60 to 100 centimeters.
A biological technique known as coppicing. Why leave a stump that high?
Because the established root system remains alive beneath the soil. When cultivation ends, that stump rapidly sprouts new shoots. Because the root system is already there, the tree grows back exponentially faster than a newly planted seed could.
This rapid coppice growth accelerates the regeneration of the forest canopy during the fallow period, shading out weeds and stabilizing the soil.
They also physically protect the surrounding area. Before they initiate the controlled burn to clear the underbrush, they cut meticulous fire breaks around the perimeter,
Ensuring the fire remains contained and never spreads into the sacred primary forests.
We actually have quantitative data to prove the sustainability of this system. A detailed scientific study was conducted collaboratively by the Indigenous Knowledge and Peoples Network, ICAP, and the Intermountain Peoples Education and Culture in Thailand Association, or IMPACT.
They measured the exact carbon footprint of the Lawa rotational farming cycle. Let's look at this data, because you are starting by setting a section of the forest on fire, which releases carbon. How does the math make that a carbon sink?
The IMPACT study tracked a 236-hectare area. They found that the initial controlled burn does emit 480 tons of carbon.
Right.
However, you have to factor in the 10-year fallow recovery period. Because of the coppicing technique, the recovering forest pulls massive amounts of carbon dioxide out of the air.
Over the fallow period, that specific regenerating forest stores 17,348 tons of carbon.
So if you emit 480 tons, but you pull back over 17,000 tons, the net balance is positive.
The Lawa rotational farming system acts as a carbon sink, effectively storing over 16,000 tons of carbon. It is ecologically regenerative.
The data supports the practice. But despite this quantifiable evidence, this exact farming system has been entirely criminalized by the central government.
The root of this legal conflict goes back to the National Park Act of 1961, which corresponds to the year 2504 in the Thai calendar.
The legislation dictates that all lands designated as national parks belong exclusively to the state, and it strictly prohibits human settlement, farming, or woodcutting within those boundaries.
And the administrative failure occurred when the state authorities drew the boundaries on the maps directly over pre-existing Lawa villages.
Villages that had been managing those specific forests for centuries. Because the state's map suddenly overlaid their homes, the Lawa farmers were legally reclassified overnight as encroachers.
This historical tension has been drastically amplified recently by the state's modern forest reclamation policy. The Thai government has set a national target to increase forest cover to 55% of the country's total terrestrial area by the year 2037.
The government's stated goal is the expansion of the national carbon credit market. The state wants to claim these forests as carbon sinks to meet international climate goals.
But the execution of this policy has resulted in the seizure of ancestral lands and the criminal prosecution of indigenous farmers continuing their traditional TRA cycles.
This brings us to the most recent developments. In November 2024, the Thai government attempted to address the unrest by passing 2 decrees under the revised National Park Act.
These decrees allow forest dwellers to participate in a program for temporary settlement, but the stipulations are severe. They cap the land allocation to between 32,000 and 64,000 square meters per household,
which restricts the land area aggressively when you rely on a 10-year rotational fallow cycle.
They also limit the land use permit to a maximum of 20 years. And most critically for the Lawa, the decrees strictly ban any form of rotational shifting cultivation.
Activist organizations, most prominently the People's Movement for a Just Society, known as PMOVE, mobilized rapidly against these decrees.
They staged a 19-day protest right outside Government House in Bangkok, followed by a major mobilization in Chiang Mai in November 2024.
Activists argue that the laws effectively turned their ancestral forests into prisons without bars.
So we are left with a severe policy deadlock. a state apparatus trying to meet conservation targets, and an indigenous population fighting for their right to practice an agricultural system that data proves is sustainable.
The sources outline a few proposed policy trajectories that could resolve the conflict. The first is the legalization of communal land rights.
Instead of issuing temporary permits to individuals, the proposal advocates for collective land titles, recognizing the community as a whole.
The second proposal is the formal recognition of rotational agriculture. If state policies officially acknowledge TRA as sustainable, backed by the impact study, it would end the prosecution of indigenous farmers.
Finally, there is the push for communal forest co-management. This would require the Royal Forest Department and the Department of National Parks to partner directly with local village institutions.
Integrating the Lawa's traditional ecological knowledge, their techniques for cutting fire breaks, their knowledge of coppicing.
They could theoretically improve national conservation efforts without displacing the people who know the forest best. We have covered a vast expanse of history for you today. We started by cutting through the administrative confusion, separating the Palangic-speaking Lawa from the Camuic-speaking Lua.
We looked at paleogenomic data, tracking their origins back 4,000 years to the Yangtze River Basin, observing how localized endogamy shaped their genetic profile.
We traced their role as ancient urban planners, building circular cities like Wang Chet-Lin, and explored the syncretism of King Mangray's coronation, where Thai rulers sought legitimacy from the Lawa as the original owners of the soil.
We broke down the mechanics of their economic resilience, from the Bo Luang bloomery furnaces to their gravity-fed rice terraces.
We examined their cosmology, the Nam posts acting as ledgers of spiritual credit, the buffalo sacrifices, and their modern religious pluralism.
And we concluded by looking at how their ancient knowledge of the forest has collided with modern state forestry laws.
To close out this journey, we want to leave you with a final thought to consider on your own. When you look at this entire history, it becomes clear how the very concept of conservation changes fundamentally depending on who holds the power to define it. For the modern state, conservation often means drawing a hard line on a map and legally removing humans from the landscape in order to balance a national carbon ledger. But for the Lawa, conservation is not about absence. It is an active, centuries-old partnership with the landscape, where human rituals, agricultural cycles, and the deep forest are inherently and inextricably inseparable. Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.